Coming up on The Cost of Living.
We have Martha openly tweeting disparaging things about her brother. We have the whole thing landing in court over Edward's decision to replace 5 of the company's independent directors. But in terms of a juiciest thing, I would say the thing that kind of really attracted the national attention was the disputed butt dial.
Yes, butt dial is now in the annals of Canadian corporate history. The fight for control of Rogers. Billions of dollars at stake, and our cell phone bills. And the whole thing turns on a butt dial. Hi, I'm Paul Haberstrood. This is a summer encore presentation of The Cost of Living. Family businesses are at the heart of much of Canadian corporate life. Westons and Pelodos and Irvings, oh my. And, of course, the Rogers family. It just went through a very public battle for control of the company and a big chunk of this country's telecom industry. Later in the show, we talk to Alexandra Pozatsky about her book, Rogers v. Rogers. Also today, one thing you can't find in a casino is a clock. They want you weaving through a maze of slot machines, blissfully unaware that time is passing. You know who wants the same thing? Your local shopping mall. Up first, it's been a tough stretch for retailers. Like, The Body Shop has filed for creditor protection. If that makes you sad, can't get your favorite moisturizer, just wait. These days, you never know what brand is about to make a comeback. Remember Le Chateau? Of course you do. How about J.Crew? Aldo, Pier 1.
Retailer Pier 1 has filed for bankruptcy after racking up 59.
Forever 21 is filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy and plans to close 170.
Now to the end of an era, another popular retailer going out of business.
100-year-old Brooks Brothers filed for bankruptcy protection on Wednesday.
A lot of bankruptcies in retail. But, Jennifer Keene, a funny thing can also happen.
You can still buy stuff from their stores.
Right? You see their stuff online. You see some physical stores are still around. But why? I mean, at the risk of sounding like Jerry Seinfeld, what's the deal with these stores? Are they gone or not?
I don't think the risk of you sounding like Jerry Seinfeld is that great.
Ouch.
But you point to something very real. We are talking about the undead of the retail world.
So zombie brands just out there roaming the earth.
Yeah, saved from the brink and brought back to life. It can happen to brands that are just about to die and to those that have been gone for years.
From high school, I've loved Modrobes. I think from about grade 7, I noticed they were unique. They were different. They were special. There was something to them.
I remember Modrobes, those baggy pants, kind of look like medical scrubs. Jen, you throw a puka shell necklace on that, bucket hat, and it is like, what is up, 1998?
I can imagine you wearing a pair, actually. Like, they were very big with the cool kids. Alex Curry owned a couple of pairs, and occasionally over the years, he would say to his wife, Zoe,
"Man, I just love these pants."
Then one day, a couple of years ago, Alex started talking about his love of Modrobes again.
And I'm kind of rolling my eyes because we've been together for almost 20 years and I've heard this speech several times. So this was the one time that he said, "I wonder if I could still buy these pants."
But he couldn't because they're gone.
The company went under years ago, but by a weird coincidence, when Alex started looking to see if he could buy a pair, like on eBay or whatever, he sees that the Modrobes brand has just been put up for sale.
The next words out of his mouth are, "Could you imagine if we were the owners of Modrobes?" And I laughed, and I'm looking around at our property in the middle of nowhere in northern Alberta, surrounded by trees.
Yeah, they live north of Grand Prairie, which is not exactly Queen Street West, Paul.
It's not.
Which is where the Modrobes store was originally. But they ended up buying the Modrobes brand, and now they are bringing it back.
So they liked it so much, they bought the company.
Yeah, and what Zoe and Alex are doing in reviving this old brand is just one small example of a much bigger trend in retail. There are several companies now whose business is just to snap up brands that are in trouble. The biggest player, Authentic Brands Group, now owns the rights to nearly 60 brands. And some of them are really legendary companies like Brooks Brothers, Hunter Boots, Nine West, Forever 21.
So it buys these brands and does what with them?
Well, Authentic buys the brand and then licenses it out to other companies who actually make stuff. And then, this is why you might hear about a company that's gotten into trouble, might even go into bankruptcy like Pier 1, and then a few months later, it's back as an online store.
Okay, so it goes away, but it's not like gone.
Yeah, it can be a little confusing as a consumer, right? You hear the headlines about a company going under, you assume it's gone. For example, Le Chateau. Remember in 2020 it filed for creditor protection? Well, its intellectual property was bought up by another company called Susie's, which owns Susie Shear, and now you can buy from Le Chateau again online and as a store within a store at Susie Shear.
Okay. But if people wanted to shop at Le Chateau or a Pier 1, wouldn't those stores still just be around?
It's not that simple. Retail analyst Farla Efro says just because the business failed doesn't mean the brand did.
It's kind of what happens behind the scenes, as I like to say, and it could be due to management. It could be just to different decisions. It could be just a cash flow and perspective. But at the end of the day, it's not the brand's fault.
So a retailer can be run poorly, it can rack up a bunch of debt, or, hey, maybe it just, runs into a pandemic. That can happen in business, but the brand itself, still worth something.
Yeah, I mean, you think about all the time that goes into building that name recognition. Like if you think of a store like Toys R Us, which was in a lot of trouble a few years ago, Grant Packard, a marketing professor at the Schulich School of Business in Toronto, says brands like that have built up an enormous amount of goodwill.
There's this kind of hidden secret value in them. If we can use them successfully, that's great because it's really expensive to build that. So if Toys R Us can come back under a new owner or in a new market and take advantage of that pre-built goodwill, that equity, that the company's saving millions and the consumer, has fond memories, and you don't have to create a new toy store brand or car brand or fashion brand.
Yeah, why start from scratch if you don't have to? But do the new owners sell the same stuff, or at least stuff of the same quality, or are they kind of doing it on the cheap?
It's hard to know what's happening behind the scenes with each of these companies. The revived version of J.Crew online is still selling preppy sweaters. Are they producing them in the same factory with the same fabrics, the same designs as before? I asked Alex Terzler about that. He is with the management consulting firm Kearney in New York.
Sometimes yes, sometimes the manufacturing agreements and partnerships will have changed along with the ownership. But again, right, you might actually very well buy the same product because most of these companies were not owning their manufacturing in the first place. So that might not have changed anything.
So it really feels like this is just kind of a case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What if we step back, though, Jen, and get a little philosophical here? Because companies come, companies go, and when new retailers come up, they bring new ideas, they bring new stuff. Does any of this recycling of old brands crowd any of that out?
Sure, but building something new is risky, especially right now. It is just such a tough time for retailers. They're coming out of the pandemic, which was brutal. People are cutting back because of inflation now. And then there's competition from fast fashion like Shein and Temu. So Farla says we're seeing the same cautiousness in retail that we're seeing in the entertainment world.
It's no different to TV today, where all you're seeing is let's reboot Frasier. Why? Because it served a great market and it did fantastic. And I do think that when you're launching a brand that's brand new from zero, right, it takes a long time and there's a lot of investment that goes into it. I think this is a way to kind of get that quick fix.
So Modrobes coming back is like the Frasier of the retail world?
Hoping for a 90s revival.
Okay, but how are they actually doing it, like practically? I mean, she said they're in the middle of nowhere in the forest north of Grand Prairie. That's not exactly a hotbed for, like, textile manufacturing.
Well, it doesn't have to be. I mean, they're operating the business out of their home. They sell online, but they're using the same designs as the original Modrobes, manufactured in Canada, same specs, same fabrics, and they are feeling pretty optimistic.
You know, the 90s are coming back. There's still nothing comparable to it on the market. They've got those certain features that make them unique. And then
we knew we
there's
couldn't
nothing
design
like it.
anything better.
Yeah.
And when it was something that we loved and so many loved, to bring back that nostalgia to people, to Alex, was very exciting for us.
I'm feeling a bit nostalgic. Feel like, getting some glow sticks, putting on some Fat Boy Slim right about now. The Funk Soul Brother. Check it out now.
You need your old Modrobes t-shirt. I'll see you at EdgeFest 2024.
Yeah.
In the mosh pit.
I'm sure I'll have tickets. Thanks, Jen.
You're welcome.
This is a best of edition of The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Haberstroh. Do you ever make a quick trip to the mall that's not so quick? It was that wrong turn you took getting from Sport Check to the Bay. Cost you a bunch of steps. That also wasn't an accident. It's based on science. Yeah, mall science. Our producer Ellis Cho says they know how to make us stay longer and spend more.
Look at this crop top. I love it. It's so nice. Like you can wear.
For Monica Agarwal, the mall is her happy place.
When I come here, I'm just so stimulated by seeing people around me, looking at new things.
She can spend hours going from store to store and often loses track of time.
Definitely, I'm having a lot of fun. That's why I don't know what time it is right now, right?
And that's exactly what malls want.
What you want to do is disorient people, take away windows, take away clocks, have lots of twists and turns, make sure that they can focus only on the merchandise.
Colin Allard is a psychology professor at the University of Waterloo. He specializes in environmental design. He says malls are built like a maze. Hallways look the same, directories are few and far between. Kind of like casinos.
Casinos are also spaces that are designed explicitly to encourage people to give up their money.
Just like casinos, malls keep people in by providing lots of distraction. And when people aren't sure where they are or what they're doing, Colin says they enter something called the state of surrender.
And when you reach that point of surrender, then if somebody nudges you, even gently, and says, "Here, buy this," then you're much more likely to do it. My wife and I have my wife has a joke that she often recounts, that she likes the idea of taking me for a wander through an IKEA store and then to a jeweler, knowing that by the time we get to the diamonds, I'll be in such a state that I'll give her whatever I possibly can.
If you can hire people out, if you can get them to make a series of choices over time, as time goes on, people make poorer and poorer decisions. They stop acting quite as rationally.
So how long does it take for that to happen? James Intrillagator studied this question a decade ago. He's a psychology and design professor at Tufts University. He says it only takes about 20 minutes. And for shoppers, that means
they will start to be more susceptible to advertisements. They'll be more susceptible to salespeople making suggestions and recommendations. They'll be less likely to kind of do comparison shopping. They want to just kind of get it over with at that point.
Malls do whatever they can to make you spend more time there and spend more money.
Oh, look at this. I love this t-shirt. They have Doraemon.
Monica Agarwal doesn't mind getting lost or distracted at the mall. She loves it. And in the end,
It's up to us as a consumer where we want to stop and how much we want to spend.
For the Cost of Living, I'm Ellis Cho.
This is an encore presentation of The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Haberstrood. The list of richest Canadians reads like a family reunion. We get groceries from the Westons, news from the Thompsons. In Atlantic Canada, they'll tell you all about the Irvings. In Quebec, it's Pelados and Desmarais. Most of the time, this kind of old money keeps its business to itself. But every now and then, we get to glimpse behind the curtain. So it was with Rogers and its very public family battle for control of the company. Alexandra Pozatsky followed it through every twist, turn, and tweet. She's a telecom reporter at the Globe and Mail and the author of a new book, Rogers v. Rogers, The Battle for Control of Canada's Telecom Empire. Hello.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. So, Alex, let's start with the late Ted Rogers. How did he end up at the top of this giant telecom empire?
Well, Ted is a fantastic place to start because, of course, he is the founder of Rogers Communications. And, Ted, his own father, had died when he was young and when Ted was a small child. And his mother wound up essentially divesting of the family business and being left with close to nothing. And so she instilled in her son, young Ted, this drive to get the Rogers family name back into prominence and to rebuild what they had lost with the passing of his father. And so Ted, he starts out, taking on tons of debt and taking on all of these risks and eventually starting out in TV and radio and then getting into cable and then finally wireless. He builds Rogers Communications into an investment grade company.
And he also has children along the way, right, with his wife, Loretta. Can you give us a quick snapshot of his kids?
So his eldest child is Lisa, and Lisa is followed by his first and only son, Edward. And then after Edward, we have Melinda, and then finally Martha. And as Ted is building this company, of course, there's these questions swirling within Rogers about succession and who will lead the company once Ted steps aside or once he passes away. And so what we see is both Edward and Melinda kind of working their way up through the ranks, taking on various senior roles within the company. And there's all these sort of whispers within the rank and file about a perceived sibling rivalry between the two of them.
Did things end up fracturing between them then?
Well, what ends up happening ultimately is that before Ted passes away, he ends up not giving the CEO role to either Edward or Melinda. What he does is he leaves it up to the board to decide who the CEO of Rogers will be, but he indicates a very strong preference for a non-Rogers family member, and that is the head of the company's wireless business, who ends up becoming the COO, a man named Nadir Mohammed. Now, at the same time as Ted is planning succession in the CEO role, he's also planning for another, arguably even more important succession, and that is who will succeed him as the controlling shareholder of Rogers Communications. And in this particular role, he puts his son Edward in charge. And so there is kind of a widely held or widely perceived belief that it is this decision that actually fractures the relationship between Edward and Melinda. And what we see play out in the fall of 2021, after the company has been through a series of CEO changes, is a fracture in the family with Edward and his sister Lisa on one side and Melinda, Martha, and their mother, Loretta, on the other side over who should lead the company going forward.
The Rogers family saga, it's been compared to the HBO show Succession. What do you think of that comparison?
I can certainly see a lot of reasons for why people make that comparison. I mean, this story has got everything, right? It's got sibling rivalry, it's got betrayal, it's got, many of the same elements that made Succession such a compelling show to watch. And what's particularly interesting is that we actually saw a direct crossover between Succession and the Rogers story, in that the patriarch on HBO's Succession actually recorded a video for Edward Rogers. This is something that was purchased through the website Cameo, where you can pay a celebrity to record a personalized greeting for a fee. And so somebody paid Logan Roy to record this personalized greeting for Edward, where he congratulates Edward Rogers on his real life succession at Rogers Communications. And so obviously there's this incredible kind of confluence of events where, the walls between fiction and reality are crumbling. At the same time, I do think it's important to note that the Roys are a fictional family, and therefore it's kind of fun to sort of watch them tear each other apart. But, Rogers is a real family. These are real human beings. And so I think there's an element of kind of pain and sadness to seeing this quarrel playing out in this very, very public fashion, with, a son going against his mother and his two sisters. And, obviously we all have conflicts in our families, so that makes it kind of relatable, but there is sort of a sadness to seeing it play out this way.
So as this family falling out is happening, Rogers is also in the middle of this huge deal for Shaw. The Competition Bureau wants to block it. It says the industry is already too cozy. Rogers, Videotron, Shaw, they make all kinds of promises. They say, no, this will be good for customers. It's been about a year since the deal closed. Do we know yet how things are playing out?
From the things that we can see so far, it's kind of a mixed bag. Right out the gate when Rogers closed its takeover of Shaw, we did see them come out with some competitive offers. So we did see some declines in prices. We saw an increase in competition as per a telecom industry metric known as churn, which measures the monthly rate of customer turnover. And so when you see customers switching carriers, that indicates to you that competition is up in the industry. But then that was followed by some price hike announcements from both Rogers and Bell. And then we've also seen some comments from the Competition Bureau talking about how some telecom prices are now more expensive in Western Canada, although we didn't get a lot of details about that. It's a really mixed bag, and it can be quite hard to come out definitively on this issue, because when it comes to something as complex as wireless prices, there's so many different ways to skin the cat. You're comparing apples and oranges, and so it can be quite hard to measure.
Okay, so now we do have that second generation, Edward Rogers running the company. He's in control of Rogers. Do you have any sense, Alex, about how Rogers, the company, might change under Ed compared to his dad or some of the other CEOs we've seen?
Well, one of the concerns that Ted had about Edward was that Edward was too financially focused. He openly talked about how Melinda was the most like him. She was the most strategic from a business perspective. And meanwhile, he referred to his son Edward as Edward the accountant, because he was concerned that his son was too focused on just tightening purse strings, cutting costs, and that he wouldn't invest enough for the long term. It is interesting that the person that Edward has selected to be the CEO of Rogers was for the longest time the CFO of Rogers. And so I think that kind of speaks a little bit to his focus. Now, that said, also under Ed's reign, Rogers has made a major acquisition of Shaw, which one could argue is an investment for the future. And so it's a little bit hard to say, but what we can see for certain is, there has actually been a settlement in the Rogers family in the last little while. And so both Melinda and Martha have actually agreed to step down from the board. Beyond that, we don't know what the terms of the settlement are, but Melinda and Martha were the two kind of leading voices of dissent against Edward on that board. And meanwhile, Edward has added his sister Lisa to the board, as well as other allies to both the board and the Rogers Control Trust. And so he's really solidified his grip over his father's empire.
So if you're a Rogers customer and you're looking at these two figures, you're looking at Ted Rogers, the founder of the company, this visionary who's willing to take big swings in the telecom space and innovate and do all of these things, versus, his son. And again, a quick sketch, but Edward the accountant, more of a bean counter. What might that tell you as a Rogers customer about the direction of this company that, you pay bills to every month?
I mean, that's a great question, and it's not one that I can necessarily definitively give you an answer to. But what we have seen is that in the last little while, the number of complaints that customers have filed to the telecom ombudsman against Rogers have actually gone up quite dramatically. And so it seems that customer service, one might assess from that the customer service is lagging. So I guess the big question is going to be whether Rogers is going to make the investments necessary in customer service to improve the service that its customers are receiving. Of course, we also saw not too long ago a significant nationwide outage of all Rogers services. And coming out of that outage, the CEO, Tony Staffieri, made certain promises that Rogers would make investments in network resiliency, that it would separate the two cores, the two network, it had one common network core for both its cable business, meaning its TV and internet service, and its wireless service. And so the company committed to separating those two cores so that even if one network core went down, it wouldn't affect all services. And so, it still remains to be seen whether those upgrades have been made and, when they'll be completed and whether that will improve the resiliency of the Rogers network going forward.
Well, Alexandra Pozatsky, all the best with the book.
Thank you so much for having me.
Alexandra Pozatsky is the author of Rogers v. Rogers, The Battle for Control of Canada's Telecom Empire. That's all for this week. But if you have a question about business or economics that's really been niggling at you, well, we have a question and answer show coming up. And we want to know what you want to know about. In the past, you've asked everything from how much of a worry is the federal debt to why does craft beer come in tall cans? So if you have something you're curious about, give us a call. Our number is 1-866-550-COST. That's 1-866-550-2678. Or email costofliving@cbc.ca. The show is based in Calgary. The Cost of Living is produced by Danielle Nerman, Ellis Cho, and Jennifer Keene. With help from Caroline, it's summertime and the living is easy Ferris. I'm Paul Habersrud. Thanks for listening.